The morning the HOA Karen complained about my barrier, I had no idea it would end with flashing lights, sirens, and animal control trucks blocking the street. What started as a quiet fight over community rules turned into the most unbelievable chain of events I've ever witnessed. And if you think this is just another petty HOA argument, trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. I live in a small neighborhood tucked beside a slow-moving creek. It's peaceful, shaded by trees, and usually calm enough that you can hear frogs at night. Years ago, after heavy rains caused the creek to swell, I installed a sturdy barrier along my property line. It wasn't pretty, but it was practical. It kept debris, wildlife, and floodwater from creeping toward the houses. I paid for it myself, got permits, and made sure it stayed on my side of the property. No one complained, at least not at first. Then Karen moved in. From day one, she made it clear she had opinions about everything. Trash cans, parking, lawn height, even the color of porch lights. So when she noticed my barrier during one of her daily walks, I could practically feel the complaint forming before she even opened her mouth. She said it was an eyesore, that it ruined the community aesthetic, and that it probably violated some HOA rule she couldn't actually name. I calmly explained why it was there. I told her about the flooding, the wildlife, and the permits. She didn't care. To Karen, rules weren't about safety, they were about control. Within days, I started getting emails from the HOA, all forwarded by her, all demanding I remove the barrier immediately. At first, some neighbors quietly supported me. A few even admitted the barrier made them feel safer during storm season. But Karen was louder. She framed the issue as a threat to property values, warning that outsiders would judge the neighborhood. Fear spread faster than facts, and I could sense the HOA board slowly bending under pressure, unsure whether to stand firm or give in. I pushed back. I sent documents, photos, and explanations. The HOA board hesitated, but Karen didn't. She escalated, calling meetings, knocking on doors, and telling neighbors my barrier was dangerous. The tension grew fast, and something about the way she smiled during those arguments told me she wanted a confrontation, not a solution. The creek, silent and ignored, waited patiently, as if nature itself was listening closely nearby. What none of us realized was that removing that barrier wouldn't just satisfy Karen's ego. It would open the door for something far worse, something none of the HOA rules were prepared to handle. The HOA meeting where everything changed felt less like a discussion and more like a courtroom. Drama. Karen sat front and center, arms crossed, nodding every time someone mentioned community standards. She had printed photos of my barrier, highlighted excerpts from the HOA bylaws, and a smug confidence that suggested she already believed she'd won. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out the facts again, calmly and clearly, but logic doesn't always stand a chance against loud certainty. Despite my evidence, the board voted to temporarily remove the barrier while they reviewed the situation. Temporarily, they said, as if water and wildlife followed schedules. I protested, warning them about the creek during storm season, about the animals that used it as a corridor. Karen rolled her eyes and muttered that I was being dramatic. The decision passed, and just like that, years of precaution were undone by a show of hands. The barrier came down the next week. I watched from my porch as workers pulled it apart, exposing the muddy bank and slow-moving water behind it. Karen stood nearby, phone raised, recording like she'd just won a victory. She even waved when she noticed me watching. The creek looked harmless enough in the afternoon sun, and for a moment, the HOA thought they'd proven me wrong completely. Then the weather changed suddenly. 3 days later, a heavy storm rolled in overnight. Rain hammered the roofs, and by morning, the creek had swollen beyond its usual line. Without the barrier, water crept closer to the yards, carrying branches, trash, and signs of wildlife movement. I walked the edge carefully, noticing deep tracks in the mud that hadn't been there before. They were wide, heavy, and unsettling. By midday, neighbors started whispering. Someone claimed they saw something moving near the creek. Another said their dog refused to go outside. Karen dismissed it all in the group chat, calling it paranoia and blaming me for stirring fear. She insisted everything was fine, right up until the moment things were not fine. That afternoon, screaming echoed across the neighborhood. It came from the direction of the community pool. Phones started buzzing, doors flew open, and people ran toward the sound. I followed at a distance, already suspecting what no one wanted to say out loud. Floating calmly in the shallow end of the HOA pool was an alligator. The same Karen who'd mocked my warnings stood frozen at the gate, pale and shaking, clutching her phone. The barrier she hated was gone. The creek was open, and nature had taken the most inconvenient route possible to make a point. Within minutes, sirens wailed. Karen was the one who made the call. Animal control arrived with flashing lights, drawing the entire neighborhood outside like a spectacle. Trucks blocked the entrance. Officers unrolled caution tape, and suddenly the HOA pool looked less like a luxury amenity and more like a crime scene. The alligator barely moved, floating calmly, as if it had every right to be there. Karen, meanwhile, paced back and forth, loudly explaining how this was completely unexpected, and no one could have predicted this. I stood quietly among the neighbors, listening. Some people whispered nervously, others recorded videos, and a few slowly turned to look at me. The realization spread without words. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was a direct result of removing the barrier. The creek had overflowed, the natural path had reopened, and the alligator had simply followed it. An animal control officer asked questions about recent changes to the area. I explained the barrier, the vote, and the warnings I'd given. Karen interrupted repeatedly, insisting the barrier had nothing to do with it and accusing me of trying to avoid HOA rules. The officer raised a hand, silencing her, and asked who ordered the removal. Every eye drifted toward Karen and the HOA board members standing behind her. The alligator was eventually secured and removed safely. But the damage was already done. The pool was shut down indefinitely. Parents worried about their kids. Homeowners worried about liability. The HOA worried about lawsuits. Karen, however, worried most about how this made her look. She argued with officers, demanded explanations, and insisted the situation proved the neighborhood needed stricter enforcement, somehow blaming everyone except herself. That night, the HOA group chat exploded. Messages flew back and forth, some apologizing to me, others demanding answers from the board. Photos of the alligator circulated fast, and the story spread beyond the neighborhood. What had started as a petty complaint had turned into a public embarrassment. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA president. The tone was different this time, polite, careful. They acknowledged the unforeseen consequences of removing the barrier and asked to discuss reinstating it immediately. There was no mention of Karen's name. But there didn't need to be. Everyone knew. Karen avoided eye contact for days. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by tight smiles and hurried walks. The creek flowed quietly again, as if nothing had happened. But the neighborhood had changed. People started questioning HOA decisions. They started listening instead of reacting. Nature had spoken louder than any meeting ever could. In the weeks after the alligator incident, the neighborhood settled into an uneasy calm. The barrier was reinstalled, this time with full HOA approval and a noticeably quieter board meeting. No one argued about aesthetics anymore. Safety had suddenly become the priority everyone claimed to care about from the beginning. Watching the workers put the barrier back in place felt less like a victory and more like a lesson, finally learned, though it came at a ridiculous cost. The HOA sent out an official statement blaming environmental factors and unexpected wildlife behavior. It carefully avoided admitting fault, but the subtext was clear. They'd underestimated nature and overestimated their authority. Several neighbors stopped by my house to apologize, admitting they'd stayed silent because it was easier than pushing back against Karen. Those conversations mattered more to me than any apology email. Karen, however, never apologized. She shifted tactics instead. Now she told anyone who would listen that she was the hero of the story, the one who called animal control and saved the neighborhood. The irony was almost impressive, but her influence had changed. People nodded politely and moved on. Her complaints carried less weight now, and the HOA board was noticeably slower to act on her demands. The pool reopened months later, complete with new warning signs and wildlife safety guidelines. Kids splashed again, adults relaxed, and life returned to something close to normal. But the memory lingered. Every time the creek rose after a storm, people checked it carefully. Every HOA proposal was questioned. The blind trust was gone. As for me, I kept records of everything. Emails, votes, photos. I learned that living under an HOA means documenting reality before someone tries to rewrite it. I also learned that standing your ground calmly, even when you're outnumbered, can matter more than winning arguments in the moment. The barrier still stands, solid and unremarkable, doing its quiet job. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't care about opinions. It simply exists for a reason. Sometimes I think that's what bothered Karen the most. She couldn't control it, couldn't argue it into submission, and couldn't bully it away permanently. In the end, the alligator didn't just wander into a pool. It wandered into an illusion, exposing how fragile HOA authority really is when it ignores reality. Rules can be rewritten. Votes can be reversed. Nature doesn't negotiate. And every time I hear someone complain about the barrier now, I just smile. Because the neighborhood remembers exactly what happens when it's gone. Did you enjoy this wild HOA story? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us what you would have done if you were in my shoes. You won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned for more crazy neighborhood stories